Can you be a Christian and have no association with church? That was a question I had to wrestle with about 20 years ago. I was taking a walk on this particular day along a place called the Serpentine River, which is just near our house. It has some beautiful walk trails and some boardwalks you can cross over. And I always go for a bit of a walk at the end of the day just to process how stuff I've gone through with work or life. And on this day, I was wrestling with that question: can I continue with my Christian faith and have no association with church? Up until that point, I'd now dropped away from church for at least 6 months. I'd always been part of church throughout my whole life, but here I now was dropping away from it, not wanting to associate it with anymore. And that was due to a series of very deep pains and hurts that I'd gone through, and I left myself pretty betrayed and quite confused about things. I almost had got that conclusion made in my mind that if I went back to church, I would have to go through these experiences again. So maybe it was best I just drop out and have no association with it. My very faithful wife continued to go to church during that time with my daughter, but I didn't. But here I now was, having to face this question: do I continue on having no association with church and follow Jesus, or do I need to go back? Well, I went back. But even though I went back, I've always had a great sympathy for anyone who has gone through a very painful experience in their Christian walk and has fallen away from church attendance as a result. Maybe they just have no association because, like me, they feel I can't go through the pain I went through again. It would crush me, so I just am going to keep myself away and keep following Jesus. I do have great sympathy for those people, and I get it. I understand how you can get to that point. But the sympathy I have does not finish with a full stop. It finishes with a however. And the however stems back to a teaching Jesus gives in Matthew 13. It's a parable he gives about a landowner who plants a crop of wheat. It's pure wheat, a clear field with only wheat in it. But one particular night when the landowner is asleep, an enemy of the landowner creeps in and he throws seeds everywhere, which creates weeds. So when the workers of the landowner come down to the field one day, they see this wheat beginning to grow, but now they spot weeds among the wheat. And they go back to the landowner and they say, "We don't understand. We thought that was a pure crop." And the landowner says, "Yes, it was, but an enemy has crept in and planted the weeds." So the workers say, "Do you want us to go into the field and we'll rip up all the weeds for you?" But the landowner says, "No, don't do that, because you may end up wrapping up the wrong weeds. You might pull up the wheat as well." The wheat sometimes can look like weeds, but in some other cases, the weeds can be very close to the wheat and you can end up pulling both up at the same time. So he says, let them both grow to the fully mature, and at the end of the harvest, pull up the weeds, take them away and have them destroyed, and with the wheat, take them away to the grain bins for their harvest that they produce. That parable is about the reality of life, particularly the reality of being part of a Christian community. Being part of a Christian community means being part of a community that has some wheat that's tall and strong, some wheat that's short. It might not produce as much grain as the others, but you have all sorts of different heights of different wheat. But amongst the different heights of the wheat, there are also weeds. But there are 2 points in here. The first point Jesus makes is we do not know the hearts of people. Therefore, we cannot go around in a church saying, this person who hurt me must be a weed, therefore they need to get out of the church. For us to protect people being hurt, we need to start booting out every person who hurts someone else. And Jesus says you can't do that, because you might end up booting out wheat. Because we do not know the hearts of people, only God knows that. We don't want to form a cancel culture within the church. So that's number one. The second point he makes is that the weeds are always going to be there. So the wheat must learn to grow despite the weeds. The real question is not, can I grow despite the weeds? The question is, how do you know if you are wheat or you in fact are a weed. The Apostle Paul in Galatians 5 talks about the fruit of the harvest, as in the fruit of the Spirit. And the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5 is given many different names, but it all comes under one particular produce, and it's the produce of love. Love, not just for your mum or your dad or your brother or sister, specifically love for other believers. Jesus in John 13 speaks to his disciples and he says to them, I have a new commandment for you. You are to love one another. And you love one another in the same way I have loved you. And if you love one another, this is how people around you will know that you are my disciples. Jesus loved the 12 disciples. He knew they were at different levels of wheat. Some were very young and immature, but Jesus invests himself into them. He doesn't pander to them or try to treat them softly when they should be spoken to. He speaks openly and honestly when love needs to be spoken about. He confronts them when they need to be confronted. He lifts them up when they need to be uplifted. But he loves them all the same, despite their failures, despite their immaturities, despite their selfishness. He invests into them. Except one of them is a weed. Judas. The one who is to betray Christ. And there's this remarkable moment after 3 years of ministry. Here they are around the Last Supper. And Jesus has been with his disciples for all this time. And as they talk, then Jesus makes a shocking announcement. He says, one of you 12 is going to betray me. Now at that point, the 11 disciples, not Judas, are not looking directly at Judas saying, oh yeah, we know who this is. Oh, we've been seeing Jesus for the last 3 years treating Judas very differently, giving him the cold shoulder, being pretty short and sharp when he speaks to him. Oh, we can tell there's been some serious tension between Jesus and Judas. That doesn't happen at all. The disciples instead look at each other and they say, who is it? Is it him? Is it me? They are so thrown because they have not been able to spot the difference between how Jesus has responded to any of them. Jesus has loved them all. This is the part we need to come to grips with. Jesus calls us to love one another despite the weeds. You see, the weeds, people, are a test. In the parable, the landowner says that the weeds have been planted by the enemy. When we have the weeds that hurt us, that throw us, they have been put there by the enemy to draw you away from Christian fellowship. Because by pulling you out of Christian fellowship, that takes you away from that one produce you can give to prove that you are a follower of Jesus, and that is your love for other people. But if you spend months walking along a river on your own with the decision to never associate with other believers again, what happens to your produce? It's all about love. And so the question that I had to wrestle with, and the question anyone who has dropped away from church fellowship needs to wrestle with, is not, can I be a follower of Jesus and not associate with church? The question is, can you be wheat and continue to grow despite the weeds?